Well then, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. As you say, my name's George Prew. I'm a third-year PhD archaeology student, and my research focuses on what we can learn about ancient communities from how they dress their dead, which overlaps nicely with some of the things I'll be talking about with this object right here. The focus of my talk is the importance of context for investigating the past, especially through museum collections, and what we can and cannot learn from objects when they are removed from their context, like this object was. The question of context and of the importance of knowing and understanding where our objects come from is so key to a load of issues around museums, particularly cultural restitution, where wrongfully obtained and or displayed objects or objects which are requested back by communities who have a claim to them need to be tracked and investigated for where they came from and how they came into the museum's hands. I'm not talking about that today. I leave that to the more knowledgeable scholars of the Curating Discomfort programme, who I believe have previously had Friday Focus talks. Here I'll be talking about the importance of context, even just for understanding what might be considered more innocuous objects, and for using them to their full potential, for getting everything we can from them. So, onto my object. It's this, a ceramic plaque showing a winged figure with long hair. She wears a long dress-like outfit cinched at the waist with a wide belt. I call her a she due to cultural context, which we'll get into in a bit. I love this object because, first off, it's beautiful, but it's removed from its context in various ways. We don't know where it was originally found, because it was almost certainly not found in documented excavation, but was brought to market in the 19th century, though we do know who gave it to us, and more on that later. But we don't know what region immediately it's from. Get on to regions in a moment, but I should also point out it's a lot smaller than you might think it is. If you look at the ruler at the bottom there, it is about 5 centimeters wide, well, 5 centimeters wide by about 12 centimeters tall. Should just point that out because it's very easy out of context for this thing to look like a architectural feature. So, onto where this thing is from. The listing that it has on the museum website says that it's from, quote, Etruria, Central and Northern Italy, Magna Graecia. Oops, sorry, I think we've moved things slightly. Etruria, Central and Northern Italy, Magna Graecia, which I should stress are not the same place. Etruria is the bit in red here, roughly goes from the Po Valley in the north to Rome, was kind of its southern extent. Northern Italy is generally considered these bits named Ligurian, Lepontic, Raetic, Venetic, and Magna Graecia is what's labelled there as Greek in orange. There's sort of southern outcroppings of, or southern colonies of Greece. So already there we've got a bit of a confusion of context, and I should say Magna Graecia gets that name. It gets that name probably in the second half of the first millennium BCE. So we don't know that, and finally we also don't know what the function was. Like, it's clearly a part of something larger, but what? So what can we say? Well, analysing the object, we can see that the listing is right to say it's from Etruria. It is. And Etruria is an area, as again seen on the map, covering roughly modern Tuscany and most of Umbria, spreading up, spreading down a bit. And it's a very important area, or very interesting area in early history in the first millennium BCE, because it's where the early kings of Rome, semi-mythical kings of Rome, Tarquinius Superbus and the like, are supposed to have been from there, from Tarquinius specifically. And they were subsumed into the expanding Roman Republic from, let's say, about 400 BCE onwards. Before that, though, they had very much their own culture, and one which interacted with peoples across the Mediterranean. In fact, around half of the known painted Greek pots you'll see in museums were actually found in Etruria, traded there by their Greek creators. One of their own major ceramic outputs, one of the major ceramic outputs of Etruria was this dark, shiny, black, lustrous Bucaro pottery, as it's called. And it's black all the way through. It's it's just this beautiful stuff, and it's a real symbol of Etruscan pottery, and it means that we can be confident that this was made in one of the cities in Etruria sometime between about 900 and 500 BCE. Should also note that the two other Bucaro things I'm showing here, one is a vase with lovely stamped decoration, and the other is what's known as an abecedarian. It is in the shape of a cockerel, and it has the entire Etruscan alphabet written on it, we think to help teach children their letters. That's not this though. What we're looking at is part of a larger thing, the style of the woman depicted with these large eyes and these thick, almost of dreadlocks. This hair indicates it was made around 800 to 700 BCE. We can also fairly well reconstruct what it was. Through comparison to objects like this one you can see on the left there, we can see it was probably a support from a larger ceramic tray or bowl or candelabrum, which we find a lot in Etruscan tombs to hold offerings, or in the case of candelabra, to light the tombs, and often used in the funerary ritual, or were thought of as important to the person in the afterlife. So from that, and from the fact that it's in brilliant condition, this thing clearly hasn't been out of the ground for very long, or at least not before getting into the hands of the market and museums, we can say that it probably is from a tomb. This helps us to recognize the figure it depicts, because this is actually a common character from Etruscan tombs. And I can say that because Etruscan tombs have a lot of characters in them. From about the 7th century BCE to the 1st century BCE, Etruscan tombs were often lavish things for the elite. Sarcophagi and urns were sculpted with figures on top, reclining as if they were at a banquet, like you can see at that sarcophagus on the bottom right there from the British Museum. And on wall paintings in the tombs, that's from a tomb there, the Tomb of the Leopards, so named for the leopards at the top there. They're shown reclining as if they're at a banquet, beautiful scenes of life and the afterlife. Recurring figures in these scenes are some of these what are called demons or psychopomps, these benevolent figures which help to ferry souls from this life to the afterlife. So they're often depicted leading people by the hand, or by or they're depicted by a large city gate, as you can see, sort of top middle there. And it's often these two figures, this feminine figure and this much more kind of what we see today as a frightening, almost a demonic figure. But they are definitely sort of seem to be benevolent. They're helping ferry people to where they need to go. In this context, the plaque clearly shows one of the most common of these demons or psychopomps, a vanth, as opposed to any other helpful demons the Etruscans had at the time. They have some which help you out in life as well. So in this context, the little statue provides vital and rare insights into a few aspects of Etruria. It shows an early example of a vanth, earlier than any of these tomb paintings, because these only started in the about 700 BCE, which is, and most of them are sort of 500 down to 200 BCE, whereas this is, as I say, probably 800, 700-ish. And we see her dressed quite differently from these vanths. You can see she tends to wear quite a sort of short tunic. This vanth is wearing a longer flowing dress cinched with a wide belt. And it's interesting because these wide belts are actually known from excavation. It looks like this vanth might actually be dressed in the way that certain dead bodies in the period would have also been dressed, which is where it starts getting very interesting for my research. In that way, this vanth gives a glimpse into a topic for which we have so little data, but which is near and dear to my own heart and research: how people in these periods were dressed, and how they were dressed and how they dressed themselves in life and death. There's actually a couple of diagrams from my own research there. And the seminal book for understanding Etruscan dress, aptly named Etruscan Dress by Larissa Bonfante, if you want to do any more reading on it, it is a very good book. So this little statuette is a great piece. It gives us information on religion, how people lived, died, potentially how they dressed their bodies in Etruria. How they dressed their bodies, I mean, as in dead bodies in Etruria, all in a period without any written evidence to help us. But that's not how this talk started. So what do we lose from this statuette having been delivered to the museum out of context? Well, we lose a few things. We lose specificity. This statuette can teach us about mythology, religion, dress, etc. But Etruria wasn't a single coherent community. It was a collection of cities, each of which having their own mythologies, each of which having their own ways of doing things. Not knowing which city this comes from really limits what it can tell us about any of the people who made up Etruria. Even more than that, not having the particular grave this comes from precludes research like mine. I study how communities were organized based on the objects in people's graves, not having any of the context of what else was found with this plaque, what skeleton it was buried with, and all of that information stops us doing that research, which is a shame, because it'd be brilliant if, for example, the person it was buried with was wearing the same outfit, this long dress, the belt cinching it. If Vanth here was wearing what the corpse was, if Vanth was kind of a depiction of the dead, almost of made into this, I want to say demonic figure, but demonic in a good way, godly figure. So while it was lovely of John Beazley, the original giver of this, according to the records online, apparently at age 10, according to the records online, so that's also an interesting element, to give this to the museum without the context. It's beautiful, it has a lot to say, but it can't tell us even a fraction of what it could about the people it was buried with, the people who made it, and the people who saw it. We're also left with one more problem, and a very common one in Etruscan studies. It could be fake. I should say there's nothing to indicate that this object is a forgery. It looks perfectly good to me, but forgeries have been big business for centuries, especially when it comes to Etruscan studies, and especially in the 18th and 19th centuries when this found its way to the Hunterian through John Beazley. Through John Beazley's apparently very young hands. When rich British aristocrats went on grand tours around the Mediterranean, marketplaces across Tuscany and Umbria were flooded with Etruscan objects and Etruscan objects, real and fake. Many had been looted from known tombs, ripped from their context. Etruscans tended to build tumuli, creating these, what I've heard described by scholars in Italy as these Teletubby landscapes, which made their tombs pretty easy to find and loot. But many of these objects were just modern forgeries. They all got sold all the same, and Etruscan antiquities in particular are so big on this because so many people were going to Tuscany and Umbria. The director of a dig I was on in Tarquinia, that land of the Roman kings, actually first learned about ancient pottery as a child at the knee of the local forger. So the practice continued into the 20th century. It continues into the 21st century, except that most are now sold instead as replicas. And there are even some very famous examples of Etruscan forgeries, some of the biggest. Some of these things were on display for decades. For example, I want to cast no aspersions on the one on the left. That's the sarcophagus of the spouses from the Louvre, and it is beautiful. It's a fantastic example of Etruscan make. But on the right, we have the Pinelli sarcophagus from the British Museum. The British Museum wanted something to rival this Louvre sarcophagus, and so they put out a call, does anyone have something like this? And a couple of Italian stonemasons were very happy to oblige. This was on display for, again, decades. Similarly, the Metropolitan Museum of Art displayed 3 Etruscan, quote, terracotta warriors, which were all, again, modern fakes, I think made by the same people, for 28 years from 1931 to 1960 or so. These are now, most museums have now kind of owned this element of their past and of Etruscan studies in museums, and the Pinelli sarcophagus actually made its way into an exhibition in, I believe, the 80s in the British Museum on modern forgeries, or modern takes on the classics, I think. So the work is impossible for many pieces, which, like this one, have no provenance at all, but the work done to reconstruct where objects came from and how they came to museums, even avoiding much more important issues of cultural restitution, is vital for museums to be more than display rooms of beautiful items. And this is a beautiful item. Analysis can turn a plaque showing a winged figure from somewhere in Italy, that Northern Italy, Etruria, Magna Graeca, into an early Vanth from an Etruscan tomb. It gives us an insight into that early religion and early culture, and reconstruction of context for these existing objects and meticulous detailing of modern fieldwork can give us much bigger, more colourful glimpses into individuals and communities who lived in these places more than 2,500 years ago. Thank you very much.